I mean, I think it would be a surprise to a lot of Americans that if the FDA has information through a voluntary recall about a product out there that's been contaminated, let's take, for example, the applesauce contaminated with chromium and lead, that you're barred from sharing that information.
That's bananas. That the Food and Drug Administration is not allowed to tell us when there are dangerous things that they know of in our food. That's crazy.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 306th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And this episode might feel a lot like the last episode because the last episode was episode 305. I called it Freaky Food. And it was an episode that highlighted testimony from two congressional events. One was a roundtable that was hosted by Senator Ron Johnson and had all kinds of health experts that were testifying about our food supply. And then there was also a hearing that took place, and there was some testimony from that hearing as well. I took the highlights from those two events and gave you an episode about it. And some of the things that we learned in there were, the effects of ultra-processed foods on our health. If you haven't heard the episode, I can just summarize it for you in that the effects are not good. We also learned about some chemicals that are hiding in our food and a disturbing government process for getting them approved. Essentially, the companies themselves are providing all of the data. We also learned about tobacco companies that bought our food companies and purposefully made their freaky products addictive. There was a lot in there. I learned a lot, and some of the testimony seemed unbelievable, which for some of you, in fact, you did not believe. And so right after I published that episode, I went on vacation, and when I came back, I found out that the FDA commissioner, who is the top cop when it comes to our food safety, well, he testified to Congress right after Thanksgiving. And I listened to the hearing immediately because I was curious about it. And there were some clips in there that I was just absolutely furious. I was like, oh my God, I want to put this in the episode. But the episode was already done. And then I found out that even more FDA officials had testified to another committee in Congress in September. And so this episode is going to be the highlights from both of those hearings. Because in these two hearings, the FDA commissioner and the others from the FDA, they said some things that validated some of the information that I had heard on the roundtable and the other hearing. And they added valuable and actionable perspective that I feel like we can know and use when we're lobbying our own politicians to tell them which direction we would like them to go. And so let's consider this episode part 2 in a accidental series of episodes about our food, with this part of the series being the government insider information explaining why the problems identified in the last episode are happening, because yes, they are real, what can be done about it by the government, and who in the government would need to do those things in order to get us collectively on a healthier track. I do recommend before listening to this episode that you listen to episode 305, Freaky Food, because I will be referencing some, and so will the testimony. I mean, that's kind of why I'm doing this episode. The testimony is going to reference some of the claims that were made in that episode. And then also, I'm not sure you need to listen to this episode, but it's there if you need it. But some of this testimony is also going to harken back to the baby formula shortage that we experienced back in 2022. There were hearings about that. I did an episode about that. It was episode 254, baby formula shortage, I think was the name. And so I've put that episode in the show notes for you. You can listen to that if you're unfamiliar with that whole debacle. But definitely listen to Freaky Food before you listen to this one. It will help you understand the conversation as a whole. And so to get started, let's start with the FDA commissioner. The current FDA commissioner is Robert Califf, and he was the FDA commissioner in the end of the Obama administration, and then he was hired again by the Biden administration. And his testimony was really interesting to me because he said this out loud, he was well aware that this was probably going to be his last time testifying to Congress as the FDA commissioner because he knows that he's out on his ass as soon as Trump is inaugurated. And so he felt very unleashed and basically implied that, like, I'm going to say the things. And some of the things that he said confirmed some of the information that we were hearing that sounded almost unbelievable to me from the roundtable and the hearing that I highlighted in the Freaky Food episode. And so let's get started with Robert Califf confirming something that we heard in the last episode. This testimony that you're going to hear from him is from the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. This took place on December 5th. Of course, the entire hearing for you is in the show notes if you want to watch it in full. But here is something that was said by the I'm going to say the things FDA Commissioner Robert Califf.
What's going on here is that the food industry has figured out that there's a combination of sweet, carbohydrate, and salt that goes to our brains and is very, I think it's addictive. Now, that's my opinion. And I think it's the same neural circuits that are involved in opioid addiction and other kinds of addiction that we have. And they've studied this. Again, we don't have access to their research data like we do in the human medical products arena.
So here is the head of the FDA saying our food supply has been infiltrated with foods which are addictive. Now, he did take time later in the hearing to say, like, that's my personal opinion as Mr. I'm on my way out the door. It's not the FDA's official conclusion. Like, he did cover his ass. But here's the head of the Food and Drug Administration admitting that they know that the problems identified in the last episode are real. I also don't want to just completely ignore the fact that he said that they don't have access to the research data about the foods. We are going to get back to that in a second. But first, I do want to just let you know the information that I learned from these hearings about what is going on at the FDA. They're not just sitting around doing nothing. And one of the actions that they have been taking is a pretty major reorganization to create an office that is dedicated to policing food. And so this next clip is from Jim Jones. He is the current Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And if that position sounds new to you, well, it's because it is.
I'm honored to sit before you as FDA's first Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods under the new Human Foods Program, or HFP. While the official implementation date for the HFP is October 1st, we have been hard at work making the necessary changes and improvements to fulfill our mission. This is a monumental undertaking, the single largest reorganization in the agency's modern history, touching almost every facet of the agency and impacting over 8,000 federal workers. I've spent the last year as Deputy Commissioner not just moving us forward in the reorganization, but really honing in on a vision and culture that will drive our priorities as a program. Simply put, food should serve as a vehicle for wellness. We must do all we can to ensure Americans do not get sick from their food, whether it's from acute foodborne illness, chemical contamination, or chronic diet-related disease.
And here he is a little bit later in this hearing that took place in the House Committee on Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health on September 10th. And in this clip, he is responding to questions posed by Representative Anna Eshoo of California.
So there are a number of changes that are captured in this reorganization. One of the most important one is the creation of a single decision maker for foods-related activities. That's the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods. I happen to hold that position right now. Mm-hmm. In the organization we're changing, there were multiple leaders with very similar roles and responsibilities, which created a lot of the challenges that the foods program had historically. The other major part. So
that's changed now.
On October because I was appointed about a year ago. Mm-hmm. I am the sole decision maker within the foods program. And have been since I started last September. The other major changes largely involve consolidating functions that were very similar, not the least of which were what we refer to as signals: a whistleblower, a consumer complaint, adverse effects reporting, how we pick up signals from what's happening in the foods supply.
Well, not
in the
only
country.
picking them up, but there has to be action taken.
Well, so that part of what we struggled with in the infant formula scenario was that a whistleblower complaint came in and it was not attended to. We are now consolidating
It was
these
not only
functions.
attended to, though, Mr. Jones. It was an outfit that was my understanding, a rather serial violator. So, it's, anyway, I just wanted to.
So we're consolidating functions now that we're in different parts of the organization to increase the likelihood of our ability to be coordinated and effective and responsive. We're also moving the interface with the state programs from the inspectorate into the program, because the interface with states is fundamentally a programmatic activity. It's not an inspection-related activity. So there are a number of areas where we're consolidating activities within the organization to increase our efficiency, our effectiveness, all operating under one individual leader, so there is not confusion as to sort of where decision-making authority lies.
So that sounds pretty good to me. And so just to reiterate, his position is the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods. And so it does sound like if we want to contact the federal government, whether we have complaints or information, that does seem to be the point person now that we should be targeting when we're sending in that kind of information and or complaints. So that reorganization is one thing that I learned that the FDA is in the middle of. I also learned that the FDA has been in the middle of a process of changing some of the labels on our food, although this process has been taking forever. Here's Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
Way back in 2010, the National Academy of Medicine recommended that the food and beverage industry be required to put nutrition labels on the front of their products that the American people could easily understand. That was in 2010. On June 13th, 2023, the FDA announced that it would propose a rule to require the food and beverage industry to put nutrition labels on the front of their products no later than October of 2023. The FDA missed that deadline. On December 6, 2023, FDA announced that this proposed rule would be made public in June of 2024. The FDA missed that deadline. On July 5th, 2024, the FDA announced this proposed rule will be made public by October of 2024. The FDA missed that deadline. I have been told that on November 21st, 2024, after more than 14 years of inaction, the FDA finally sent this proposed rule to the Office of Management and Budget for their review, but it has still not been made public. That is unacceptable.
Now, obviously, without this rule being public, I can't read anything and tell you exactly what it is. But they did make mention of it being similar to the labels that are in Mexico. And not last summer, but the summer before, I went and lived in Mexico City for a couple of months. And so I was grocery shopping all the time. And I noticed that on a lot of the packages, if not all of them, like there were things like fruit didn't always have these, but I remember it specifically on my Honey Nut Cheerios. There was a little color-coded labeling system there where if it was a healthy food for you, it was green. If it was like, it was yellow. And if it was full of sugar and junk, there was a red box on it. And it actually did help me make choices, especially where everything on these boxes was in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish. And so that seems like what they're trying to do here, and it has been slow rolled, obviously. And one of the concerns that I have is that we have an incoming Trump administration, which I expect to be quite industry friendly. If this isn't finalized by the time they come in, I don't know that it will be. But if RFK Jr. is the head of Health and Human Services and therefore the head of the, is the boss of the top guy at the FDA, I'm a little bit more optimistic that this process would be finished. So we'll just have to kind of stay tuned to see if we're actually getting those nutrition labels or not. Unfortunately, when it comes to the actions that the FDA is already taking, when it comes to the actions that are already in progress, that was pretty much it. Most of the rest of the testimony was highlighting things that the FDA is not doing, but also providing explanations for why they're not doing them in a lot of cases. And so let's get back to what the FDA Commissioner Robert Califf said in that first clip that I played for you, that they don't have access to certain data. Now, in the last episode, we briefly touched on the GRAS system that is used for approving chemicals that go into our food. GRAS stands for Generally Recognized as Safe, and essentially the process is operated by the corporations. I would have assumed that the Food and Drug Administration would be studying these chemicals and then saying these are safe or they're not. And that is not what's going on. Instead, the companies that want to get these chemicals approved, they do the studies, they do the research, they collect the research. They then package that research and give it to the FDA. And based on what is given to them by the corporations, that is how the FDA is doing these initial approvals of these chemicals. But what I didn't know is that all of that information that they're collecting, that data, that is not required to be given to the FDA. In fact, the situation is worse than that. So here's Robert Califf. Again, he is the commissioner of the FDA.
When the medical products industry does research, by law, if it's done on human beings, it is made public. Right. And we have access to it, and we look at the raw data and analyze it ourselves at the FDA. The food industry does massive amounts of research that we have no access to. And we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what's guiding their decisions. And it would be a lot better if the research that was done on human beings by the food industry was made public.
By not having access to the raw data, the FDA can only make their decisions based on what the companies want them to see. And that's a problem not only in the beginning of the chemical approval process, but going forward, even if people are reporting that they're getting sick. And so here's Jim Jones again. He's the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods at the FDA.
Finally, we need to ensure we aren't getting sick from chemicals in our food. Our statute generally only requires manufacturers to generate safety data for the initial approval or authorization of a chemical used in food. The burden of post-market reassessment falls entirely on FDA. We have the resources to support only a handful of chemical reassessments each year. Here again, we, FDA and Congress, must do more.
So not only is the FDA telling Congress, like, we just don't have the people to be looking into these chemicals after they're in the food supply, but the FDA commissioner is saying we also don't have the data to do that job properly. That is a huge problem, and requiring these companies to give the FDA the data they need to protect our food supply, that needs to be done by Congress. And in fact, the FDA officials in both hearings were asking Congress to help them unlock a couple different handcuffs that they have preventing them from doing their jobs fully and properly. So here's Jim Jones. Again, he is the new Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods at the FDA. And in this clip, he is speaking to Representative Debbie Dingell of Michigan.
So right now, a manufacturer, when the infant formula is within their control, if they are doing testing, and we understand that they are doing routine testing on their facility, if they are to find a positive for Coronabacter, for example, we have encouraged them to voluntarily submit that information to us, but they are not required to. We have several examples of companies doing that, and what we have learned is that we are then able to quickly get in that facility, work with the manufacturer to figure out how to ensure that a positive sample inside the facility does not ultimately lead to contaminated product. Because you have a positive find of Coronabacter in the facility doesn't mean the product is contaminated, it means you found the bacteria somewhere in the facility. So we know from experience that if a manufacturer voluntarily gives us this information, we are much more quickly able to get in that facility and work with that manufacturer to prevent a contaminated product from actually being manufactured and leaving the facility.
So requiring it is a good thing.
Good thing. Yes.
Thank you.
We have asked for authorities related to infant formula, not only for mandatory reporting of positive microbial contamination results, but also allowing us to require manufacturers to give us information related to supply chain related issues so that we're able to identify a potential supply chain problem sooner rather than later.
And so that was the infant formula situation. But even more generally, the FDA is, they have some handcuffs that I just can't believe exist. So here is Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota speaking to the FDA Commissioner Robert Califf.
I mean, I think it would be a surprise to a lot of Americans that if the FDA has information through a voluntary recall about a product out there that's been contaminated, let's take, for example, the applesauce contaminated with chromium and lead, that you're barred from sharing that information. And that, I mean, Minnesota Department of Agriculture tells me that they were forced to file a Freedom of Information request to get the information about the sources of lead poisoning when they're also responsible for trying to get these products off the shelves. So this is something I'm sure you know, I've been working on a bill that would get at this, that would allow the FDA to share this information with states and tribes and other local governments.
Please hurry up.
That's bananas that the Food and Drug Administration is not allowed to tell us when there are dangerous things that they know of in our food. That's crazy. And so, Congress has to do something about that. But in the meantime, this is how we get in the situations that we're in, like the ones that were exposed in the Freaky Food episode. Like, they know that there's products on our shelves whose labeling is deceptive. Here is Jim Jones. Again, he's the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods at the FDA. And in this, he is speaking to Representative John Joyce of Pennsylvania.
So the research that we've done of consumers is that consumers are not confused. The plant-based alternatives are not milk. As a matter of fact, they're purchasing them for exactly that reason, because they're looking for an alternative. That being said, our research also shows that consumers are not aware that oftentimes plant-based alternatives to milk are not nutritionally equivalent to milk. And so we have a scenario where they're looking for an alternative to milk purposefully. They're not confused by the soy milk. They're not confused that that's actually milk. They understand it's a plant-based alternative. That's what they're looking for. But they are not aware that such a product is nutritionally not equivalent to milk.
So buying or allowing that to be sold in a dairy case, is that not misleading then? Because nutritionally, it is not the same as a dairy product.
Thanks. So currently, our guidance, which is drafted, has not been finalized, encourages plant-based milk alternatives to identify nutritional equivalence or lack thereof on their product. We are taking right now comment on that, and ultimately we'll finalize depending on sort of where we ultimately think it's appropriate to inform consumers on the issue of nutritional equivalence.
I don't know about you, but I didn't know that. I know a bunch of people, most of them women in California, who drink soy milk and oat milk and think that they're being healthier when they do so. I had no idea about this information, and the packaging doesn't tell us. It is nice to know that the FDA is thinking about doing something, but so far they haven't actually acted. But even worse than that, there are products in our food supply that have chemicals in them that they straight up know are dangerous. Here's Jim Jones. He is the Deputy Commissioner for the Human Foods Program at the FDA.
So Red 3 presents an interesting example for us. It is actually known to be cancer in laboratory animals, rats. But the scientific consensus is that the mechanism of carcinogenicity in rats is not applicable in humans. However, under the FFDCA, which is the law that we implement, and any chemical that is shown to be carcinogenic in animals or humans, or should I say humans or animals, cannot be authorized by FDA. It's called the Delaney Clause. And so even though we don't believe there is a risk to humans under the Delaney Clause of the FFDCA, red dye, because it is known to cause cancer in laboratory animals, should not be authorized. And so that is what has been challenged FDA for many years, is how to manage around the Delaney Clause, where you have a scenario where, although there may be cancer evidence in animals, there is also evidence that is not harmful to humans.
Or how about we just follow the Delaney Clause and say you can't use Red 3, use beet juice instead? Like, if it's cancer in rats, just get it out of our food supply. But continuing with this conversation about why Red 3 remains in our food supply, here is the commissioner of the FDA, Robert Califf.
Listen carefully to what Mr. Jones said. We don't have data in humans that number 3 causes cancer, but we have it in laboratory animals. And so this gets complicated. And I want to remind you of what it takes to demonstrate that a substance that people eat causes cancer. You have to study a large number of people over a long period of time, because if something caused cancer right away, it would be obvious. But in these cases, you need something different. And I want to point out, we have a very small staff that can do this based on the budget. We have repeatedly asked for better funding for chemical safety. I brought Mr. Jones in to head the Human Foods Program because of his history of working on environmental issues. I think it is a huge priority. He's an expert in this. Please look at our requests for funding for the people who do this work. Remember that when we do ban something, it will go to court. And if we don't have the scientific evidence that will stand up in court, we will lose in court.
So they don't ban it because even though it's causing cancer in rats, they haven't proved that it's causing cancer in humans. But they don't have the staff to do the studies to prove that it's causing cancer in humans, and so they leave it in our food supply. This is why we are where we are. And they also know that there's stuff in our food supply that is just completely unpoliced. So here's Jim Jones again.
But under current law, we still don't know what's in most supplements or the scope of what's on the market. We need Congress to grant us registration and listing authority.
And as I told you in the last episode, I have been down a rabbit hole of health lately. And so I am taking supplements, and on every single bottle containing the supplements that I am putting in my body every day, it says that it has not been evaluated by the FDA. And I don't like that. And I don't understand why these are available in every single supermarket and in whole stores that are dedicated to these types of things. And the FDA is just like, we're just going to leave that the Wild West. It's fine. Now, that said, I did just take a blood test and these supplements are working. My cholesterol is way down. My vitamin D is way up. I'm very happy with what I'm doing. But I would like to know that there is someone making sure that there's nothing lurking in these pills that I'm taking every day. I'm just kind of taking a chance and hoping that these companies that are selling these to me are on the up and up. But I have no way to verify it. So I'm just praying, I guess. And similarly to supplements, and I'm personally uncomfortable with this reality, and it was mentioned in the hearing, but we are also in an atmosphere now here in the United States where you can go to gas stations, new stores that are popping up, there's delivery services, all kinds of services that will sell you food that have THC and CBD and now psilocybin in them. And that is also kind of completely unregulated. And as someone who partakes in it here in Texas, in a state where technically THC is illegal, I know that here in Texas, the way they're getting around it is that it's not THC that's in our gummies and our chocolates and all that stuff. It's something called Delta 9, which is, I don't know, some genius scientists messed with it just enough to make it technically a different substance. And so we call it Delta 9, but it feels almost exactly the same as weed does. And so somehow here in Texas, where weed is illegal, I can get it right now. I can walk literally across the street and get it right now in a store, pay with my credit card. Like, it feels very legal here, even though it isn't. And along those same lines, there is a substance that is apparently being sold all over the place. I don't know how it was off of my radar. When I asked Justin Robert Young the other day if he had heard of it, he was like, oh yeah, you can get it at the gas station on the corner. Like, I didn't know. But there's this stuff called kratom. And this was brought up in the hearing. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody hears this one just for your own safety. So here's Representative Kathy Castor of Florida. And in this, she is speaking to Jim Jones of the FDA.
There are products on the shelves across the country that are not so safe. They kind of exploit the gaps that are out there. They say, well, we're not really a food additive. We're not really a dietary supplement. We're not a drug. But some of them are very dangerous. My local newspaper, the Tampa Bay Times, did a big expose on kratom. Across the state of Florida over the last decade, over 580 people have died from overdoses related to kratom, with at least 46 Floridians dying from kratom-specific use. I know back in July that FDA issued a safety alert, and you've said that substance is not being lawfully marketed, but it just seems like we're in this limbo where people assume, okay, it's on the shelf, it must be safe. FDA says, wait, no, it's not so safe. But don't you have, is this what you highlighted at the beginning of your testimony, is you need more registration and listing authority, or is that what's the answer here?
Thanks, Congresswoman. I think that is a great question. And I think you're right that there are manufacturers who are exploiting either ambiguity within the system, or they actually really, their product does not fit within any of the legal pathways that we have. Kratom has attempted to be, we've had applications as a dietary supplement new ingredient. It has not met the standard for that. So it is not allowed for use in the United States.
But it's being used all over the United States. It's everywhere, apparently. Now, what I learned from that article that was produced by the Tampa Bay Times, I put it in the show notes for you. It's a good read if you use kratom or thinking of using kratom or just want to know what it is. But kratom is a leaf, and in general, it's been used for a long time in Asian countries where the leaf itself is chewed on or made into a tea. And where it is used like that, people are not dropping dead. And so there is a way to use this safely. And people who are using it and like it, they use it to perhaps relieve pain and put people in better moods. I mean, this is all like, I don't know about kratom. Do not take medical advice ever from me. But that is what people say they are using it for. But in the United States, where we like to get fucked up, we scrape the drug off of the leaves and we pack that powder into pills and we put it in powder form, and there's also liquid forms. And that's the form of kratom that appears to be killing people. That's also the form of kratom that people are finding in the gas stations. And these packages of kratom, they're being sold without dosing instructions, so you have no idea what's safe and what's deadly. And what appears to be the most deadly is kratom combined with pharmaceuticals. Now, the pharmaceutical companies, they're required by law, because they are regulated, to tell you if you mix this product with da-da-da-da-da, then that can be dangerous to your health. But the kratom dealers, because the FDA just says, well, it's illegal. It's illegal, so because the FDA is doing nothing, the kratom dealers, they don't have to put any of that on their packaging. And so people don't know. And so what we find here is that FDA, by just pretending that this is illegal and therefore isn't a problem, we just therefore have this lawless business. And there's a bunch of companies out there. There's even a whole lobbying organization for kratom. It's a completely lawless business. And that corporate lawlessness is being tolerated in like all 50 states. And so the result is that public health officials have already recorded more than 2,000 fatal kratom-related overdoses since 2021. And I'm just wondering, like, how many of them could have been avoided with information required on the packaging? Instructions that say you will be fine if you use it like they do in the Asian countries, but, you know, maybe don't take a shot of this stuff. Like, maybe don't use the powder form. Like, there could be information out there, like how many people, if they had understood that there were dangers, would still be with us. You know, it's just another example of lawlessness that is tolerated in business in this country, and it is so dangerous. I mean, we're having this conversation right now in the United States about our healthcare system. And when I look at our healthcare system, like when it comes to the health insurance industry, I just see lawlessness. I see lawlessness in businesses all over the place. And when it comes to food, like I said before, we have THC, we have mushroom chocolates, and, you know, those are at least regulated at the state level, but so many industries that they just do whatever they want. Bankers get to foreclose on houses that they can't even prove that they have the paperwork for, but we have these rubber stamp judges like, okay, yep, you say it's yours, here's yours, and a family has to move out. We have our health insurance industry where they can just break the law. They're supposed to cover very basic services for us, and they deny us, and there's no accountability for that whatsoever. Fucking war companies. I mean, my God. Companies get away with literal murder in this country every single day. We just aren't policing industry. And so when I look at this situation, and I look at the FDA telling us that they are handcuffed for legitimate reasons because the law doesn't allow them to do certain things, and the law doesn't give them the data that they need to take the enforcement actions that we want them to. And we look at the actual handcuffs on them, but also just the hands up approach that they have to some of this stuff. Like, well, kratom's illegal, so whatevs. Like, when I look at the lawlessness in the corporate world in the United States, one of the things that is bothering me in this moment in time is that I think that's about to get so much worse with the incoming Trump administration. And I say that because of the last Trump administration, but also this administration is a Republican administration, and we're going to have a Republican Congress. And corporate lawlessness is something that is facilitated by Republicans in Congress. And if you doubt me in that, go and listen to all of the episodes that I've produced of Congressional Dish over the last 12 years, especially during the Republican Congresses. And I just want to take a minute as I am saying this to clarify some comments I made in the last episode, because there are some people who are big mad at me because people seem to have heard an endorsement in what I said about RFK Jr. in the last episode, in me expressing that maybe some good could come out of his appointment to be the head of Health and Human Services. And so let me clear up what exactly I was trying to say there for the people that heard whatever you wanted to hear. I think that there are absolutely better people that exist in this world for that job. I do not think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the ideal candidate for Health and Human Services Secretary. I would prefer someone with, I don't know, a medical background. And someone who hasn't said crazy things about vaccines, and someone who hasn't had a brain worm. Like, this is not the ideal person. Absolutely better people exist for this job. But we are talking about a Trump appointee, okay? We are talking about someone in the mix of billionaires, because Trump is just appointing billionaire after billionaire to positions of power in his new administration. I mean, we have Elon Musk, who is first of all, I don't even know why I'm bringing up Elon Musk, because he's been appointed to co-chair the Department of Government Efficiency, the Doge Department, which, FYI, isn't a thing. That doesn't exist. It is not a part of our government. It is imaginary. But he's going to be the guy in charge of that, and his job is to be finding things to cut in our government. But he is the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. Tesla is getting government contracts to install our electric car charging stations, and SpaceX is the privatization of NASA. This guy has made so much money, billions of dollars, based on government favoritism and subsidies. And he's been welcomed into the Trump administration. We also have Vivek Ramaswamy. This is a guy who is a biotech entrepreneur who is worth at least $1 billion. We have the wife of Vince McMahon of the World Wrestling Entertainment. They have about $3 billion. They are ridiculous human beings, and she's going to be the Secretary of Education. Another billionaire who's coming into this administration is Howard Lutnick. He's going to be our Secretary of Commerce, probably. He is the chairman and CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, which is a financial services firm, aka Wall Street. Wall Street is taking over the Commerce Department. It's one billionaire after another. These people are so corporate. And so when I look at the lawlessness that is allowed in businesses, lawlessness which serves to funnel wealth to these exact people, in my crystal ball, I do think that this will almost certainly get worse by putting the people who benefit from lawlessness in corporations in positions to allow even more lawlessness to facilitate even more profiteering and money going into their own pockets. But then there's RFK Jr. RFK Jr. has an entire career in which he has been fighting corporations. And so when I look at the big picture, when I look at, okay, who is Trump actually putting in positions of power? One of these things is not like the other. So that's what I'm saying. I am completely aware that he's not the best person for the job, but he's the only one on this list so far that doesn't seem like someone who is in favor of total corporate lawlessness. So that is why I said, like, maybe in this one area, in this incoming, what I predict to be a nightmare of an administration, maybe in this one area, we can find some positivity. And with the freak out that I was witnessing in my communications with members of this audience, I decided that after the Trump administration was elected to another term, that I would focus on, okay, calm down. There is some hope to be had in the next administration. That's why I said that. But I do want to let you know that in these hearings, the Democrats made it very clear that even though there really only seems to be one nominee that I know of so far that A, used to be a Democrat, and B, might not be a total corporate servant, the Democrats are lining up to shut that nomination down. So here is Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. He's speaking to the FDA commissioner in the Senate on December 5th.
Dr. Califf, having experts and committed civil servants is essential for implementing evidence-based strategies for improving Americans' diet. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how important is it for the FDA's work on nutrition and chronic disease to receive support from the Secretary of Health and Human Services?
It's very important.
Very important. And from my perspective, we have a potential nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services, who has talked a lot about nutrition and chronic disease. Some would say what he says on diet and importance of healthy foods is reasonable. However, one reasonable opinion does not qualify someone to run the United States Department of Health and Human Services. What should be disqualifying to run the Department of Health and Human Services that oversees every aspect of our healthcare system and whose actions will impact healthcare costs, access, and innovation is a nominee who has been proposed by President Trump, who has spread misinformation about vaccines and fluoridation of our water, questioned the well-proven conclusions that HIV causes AIDS, and falsely claimed that medication for depression is linked to mass shootings, which should be disqualifying to run the Department of Health and Human Services is a history of spreading misinformation about public health measures like vaccines that result in a measles outbreak, for example, and the deaths of 83 people, many of whom were children and babies. If we are serious about addressing chronic disease, if we are serious about closing gaps in healthcare access and moving towards a healthier America, the Senate should only confirm nominees to serve in the Department of Health and Human Services who are prepared, qualified, and serious about the responsibility of their roles. In my view, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has disqualified himself to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services. And I have serious concern about several other health-related nominees proposed by President Trump to be as well. We can agree and find value in some opinions. We can agree that greed from any industry has no place in healthcare. We should agree upon that. And we should agree upon that in terms of nutrition and the role that plays in the health of Americans. But what we cannot do is sign off on nominees who would be a danger to the public health. And that is what my concern is as we move into the new year. And the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. raises all of those questions, which the next Congress is going to have to deal with.
Now, that speech by Senator Ed Markey was not an off-the-cuff speech. He was reading it the entire time. Those were his prepared words. That is what the Democrats are preparing to say in the Senate, because this is a Senate confirmation required position. And those are points that people have made to me in their big mad emails to me about me saying anything positive about RFK Jr. And you know what? There is validity to every single bit of it. I just want to put this into your mind. Let's say the RFK Jr. nomination goes down. Who do you think Trump would nominate instead of him? Do you think it would be another Democrat? Do you think it would be another person who has fought corporations for his entire career? Or do you think he would pick from billionaires and CEOs? Perhaps a CEO of a food company, perhaps a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, perhaps a CEO of a health insurance company. So let's just be careful what we wish for here. I think that there could be some positivity coming out of an RFK-led Health and Human Services Administration. That's all I'm saying. And I'm saying that because the alternatives probably look like corporate capture. So hopefully I've cleared that up. But even when the Democrats are in charge, there is corporate capture. I mean, listen to this exchange between the FDA commissioner, who's working for President Biden now, Democrat, and worked for President Obama before, Democrat. Let's listen to this exchange that he had with Senator Bernie Sanders.
Let's be honest here. The food and beverage industry spends hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying and on campaign contributions. You tell me the role that they are playing in destroying the health of America's children.
Well, I'm not going to contest your comment about the amount of money spent on lobbying. I think it's probably accurate. I don't have figures on that. But a lot of the changes that those of us who are interested in better health would like to make are blocked at the level of legislation for reasons that
but I'm
you'd have to
still
tell
not
me.
hearing you. What is the reason that our kids are unhealthy? What role do this industry play? Even now, you're getting out of office. Are you prepared to tell us that this committee, this Congress needs to take on the food and beverage industry whose greed is destroying the health of millions of people?
Well, I'm not going to castigate the people that work in the food and beverage industry.
You're not.
No, what I
That
will
is
say-
your job.
No, it's not to castigate. It's to point out how to make progress in this area. We have an industry that if you tried to change it overnight, there are farmers all over the United States who would not be able to grow the crops they're currently growing. So there needs to be a plan, and it needs to be implemented in a mature, thoughtful way across the country.
So his concern is industry. His concern is the farmers, as if we're like, I hate it when they say the farmers, because what we're talking about is the companies like Monsanto, which is now Bayer, that are selling these freaky crops, which you can just dump poison all over and the crops will survive. Like, that's what he's talking about. And those crops are concerning because they are getting into our food supply and they're covered in poisons. But that is not the concern. The concern is, well, the company would have to change the way they grow things. Yes, that is the entire point. And so it concerns me that this guy is not adversarial to these companies. The cops should be adversarial to the corporations that they are policing. Instead, he seems to be more concerned about their businesses being disrupted. I also found out this about, when they do something wrong and they get caught, this is the level of policing that they're subject to. Here's Jim Jones, who is now like the point person for everything food related at the FDA.
Well, it would be a pretty egregious violation for us to go straight to some form of civil penalty, which is what you're referring to, is where there's a dollar amount associated with it. And then the scope of the violation would inform the size of the penalty.
So they can be found in violation and they get a $0 penalty, unless it's something really egregious. That really ticks me off as someone who has gotten in a couple dust-ups with the law myself. The one that I keep thinking about is that I got arrested in Washington, D.C. I got arrested on purpose, but I was protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. This was back in 2011. And I still have the ticket that I was issued when I was arrested. Technically, what I was arrested for was I stopped walking on the street in front of the White House. Apparently, it's illegal to stand still for too long on that sidewalk. And that's what I did. And I basically was issued a ticket. But in the process of issuing that ticket, I was handcuffed, put in the back of a truck with 20 other people who were driven to the jail with no seatbelts, I might add, with our hands strapped behind our backs. And then the only way that we were allowed out of that jail and not locked in a cage for a certain amount of time is that we had to provide $100 on the spot. So for us individuals, we do something as minor as standing still and we get a fine. But the businesses, they don't get any fines on their first infractions. Business gets leniency in ways in this country that individuals just don't. And just to be clear, the solution as I see it is not more lawlessness. I deserved to be arrested that day. I was doing it on purpose, and I was fine with paying the $100. I did something wrong. I am aware of that. So I don't think the solution here is more lawlessness, more tolerance of individual theft and fraud and violence. I think the solution is more corporate policing and fines and jail time for the people in the companies that do things that get us hurt and killed. We get policed, and they should be policed too. But that's not what's happening now. And again, out of the Trump appointees, RFK Jr. is the only one that I'm currently thinking might want to do more corporate policing, not less. He's literally the only one. It's a very low bar to clear, which is why even the brainworm of Camelot can clear it. But the problem is, even if he gets in, and even if he is the guy that I really hope he is, and actually wants to take on these food corporations, there are enormous systematic barriers that he's going to have to deal with. We've already heard of some that exist at the FDA and don't just go away because we get a new Health and Human Services secretary. But there are also barriers that are erected like in the judicial system. Here's Robert Califf, the FDA commissioner.
You asked, how long does it take? Let's talk about tobacco. We were instructed to do that many years ago. We have lost in court on that issue, and we're finally winning now, it looks like. But the point I want to make is what sounds simple, given the current state of judicial affairs, First Amendment rights, the fact that corporations have the same rights as individuals, every little thing we do, unless specifically in detail instructed by Congress, it's not just that we lose in court, but we lose years.
And that situation is looking to be likely even worse going forward because of the Chevron decision in the Supreme Court. Now, before that decision, courts used to defer to executive branch interpretations of laws when the laws were kind of fluffy, when Congress, as we know they so often do, don't spell out the details about the new programs that they want to create or the new laws that they want to create. They leave a lot of it up to the executive branch to fill in the details with regulations. And so the courts used to say, we're going to defer to the executive branch regulations, their interpretations of the law, as long as what they do is determined to be reasonable. That's not the case anymore. Now, what exactly is this going to mean going forward? I have no idea. But there was a hearing about it that took place a couple months ago, and so that is currently loaded on my phone for me to listen to when I'm done with this episode, so stay tuned. I will likely give you that testimony when I have it. But the point is that there is just a lot that realistically can't be done, no matter who gets appointed to run our disaster of a healthcare system, without Congress lending a big hand. And so that's where the Republicans in Congress are going to really expose themselves for who they are coming up soon. And I hope that they pleasantly surprise me, because there are a lot of them talking about wanting to make America healthy again. But we're going to see very soon when they have the House and the Senate what bills that they write and what they actually try to get passed. And I can tell you right now that the Republicans are fighting with each other about whether to do an immigration restriction bill or a tax cut bill first, or if those priorities should be put into one monster bill. What I am not hearing any talk about from the party leaders in Congress is doing a damn thing about making us healthy again in the 119th Congress. So let's give them a chance. But so far, they're not indicating that this is going to be a priority in Congress. The Republicans will also reveal themselves when they fund the government early next year, because our government is running out of money. They've finished exactly 0 out of the 12 appropriations bills for 2025, and they ain't gonna finish it by December 20th. We already know that. There's going to be a continuing resolution, which basically means that the numbers from 2024 will just continue into 2025. We don't know how far they're going to kick that can into the new Congress, But I know that deadline is getting kicked, and I know it will be at the latest sometime in the spring. And so if they continue to starve the FDA, then we'll know that they're not really serious, because this is what the FDA is saying about their budget. Here's Jim Jones, the Deputy Commissioner for Human Foods.
The U.S. food industry produces more than $800 billion in revenue a year. FDA's $1.2 billion budget is a fraction of 1% of that total. In other words, to ensure the safety of 80% of the food we feed our families, FDA has a budget just shy of $3.50 per person per year. $3.50, less than a cup of coffee.
And they were crystal clear that they do not think that that's enough to effectively police our entire food supply system. And so what that means is to do a good job in one area, because they really had to focus on baby formula after that shortage. To do a good job in one area, they are defunding other areas. Here's Jim Jones again.
For infant formula, I feel like we have adequate resources. We have taken those resources from other parts of the food program.
And so if the Republicans are serious about making us healthy again, I do think that funding is going to be one way we'll be able to see if the Republicans were just saying things to get votes about making us healthy again, or if they actually mean it. Because if the FDA funding is one of the things on Elon's chopping block, we'll know that they were completely full of shit. But who knows? Maybe they'll surprise us. I hope so. So I know this might not be necessary, but I was kind of surprised by some of the passionate negative vibes that were coming my way in the month of November since the election. And so I want to explain to you my episode choices. I kind of did it a little bit in the episode, but I think that some of my episode choices to some are looking like denial. I think maybe me trying to not panic is looking to some like I am really happy, maybe, about the incoming Trump administration. And I just kind of want to make it clear that I know that unpleasant times are ahead. What I'm choosing to do, though, is not be consumed by future worries, especially when we have now to worry about. Now specifically is the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so we're all focused on family and the pressure of gift buying and food, so much food. And I feel like I'm really awakening to the reality that food choices are what largely determine what keeps us out of our nightmare healthcare system. You know, that's one of the reasons for my food kick. I was diagnosed with skin cancer 4 times. These were very easy surgeries. They just had to lop a little bit of my skin off. That was it. I didn't need chemo. I didn't need anything insane. And it still cost me thousands of dollars. And I want to avoid being in any way dependent upon this healthcare system because they could bankrupt me. It's dangerous. And I know that by keeping myself healthy, I can stay out of this healthcare system. Maybe, I don't know, I could still get hit by a bus, but I'm going to play my cards as best I can. And so that's why I want to know what lurks in my food. I want to know so I can avoid it, you know? And the good news is that I found that I often can. I've just been making pretty simple switches. So like, for instance, one of my favorite junk snacks is gummy bears. I lived in Germany for a while. I became absolutely hooked on Haribo because they were actually first produced in the town that I lived in, Bonn, Germany. I love Haribo. But here in the United States, they're full of chemicals. And so I found a different brand. They're organic gummy bears. I get them from Costco. I actually really like that they're individually wrapped. So I know I'm like, plastic, there's whatever choice you make, there's always a downside to it, right? But I do like these little packs of these organic gummy bears because they're sweetened with juices. So like beet juice does a really good job with the red bears, and it's sweetened with juices, and I can still eat them during my volleyball tournaments. They give me a quick rush of sugar, which help me in the games. And I just think that they taste really good. They're fine. I've also found that switching my chewy granola bars, I like the chocolate chip ones, I'm now getting breakfast bars that I get from Whole Foods. The brand that I like is Simple Mills. And I find that the Simple Mills, their breakfast bars kind of have a brownie texture to them. And I really enjoy them. They're good. I also found these fruit bars at Whole Foods that are actual fruit. So it'll be like 20 blueberries in an apple, and they're really good, and there's no junk in them whatsoever. So it took me some time to find these things. I definitely went to Whole Foods like a weirdo and was just like looking at the back of all the packages. But I'm finding my new snacks. And I'm also finding new snacks that are just like single food snacks. So I'm eating a lot of pistachios, but I get them shelled because I just don't want to deal with the stupid shells. And my favorite flavor is the honey pistachios. And then there's just like switching different brands. So I've been eating cottage cheese and pineapple for a while. And I found out that Daisy cottage cheese only has like 3 ingredients. I think it's milk, cream, and salt if you look on the package. But then the other ones, so like the Lucerne brand, there's all kinds of words in there that I don't know. So it was just switching from one brand to the other. They're the same exact price. That was an easy one to do. And so I've had to do research, obviously, to do this. I had to read box labels, and it took me longer in the grocery store. But now that I've been working on this for, I'm going to say like 6 months or so, now I have my new go-tos, and I feel a little less threatened by the corporate malfeasance in my food. Obviously, it's not perfect. Like, at any time I eat a chicken, like God only knows what that chicken was fed. Like, I'm trying to go organic where I can, when I can, but I'm just aware that I live in the United States and there's just a certain amount of policing of my food supply that's just not being done. And becoming aware of this is disturbing. And there were some really strong reactions, like so much stronger than I was expecting to the Freaky Food episode. And I'm wondering if this is because this is information that some people really just want to dismiss, like you're in the denial stage. And I really do get it. Like, I love Arby's. And I'm not talking about the Arby's with their like fresh sandwiches. Like, no, I like the Arby's roast beef purple meat. I don't know what they do to make that meat look like that or taste like that, but I like it. I like it with Arby's sauce. I generally do 1 packet of Arby's sauce on the top part of the bun and another packet on the bottom. I really liked the Big Montana. Do my fellow garbage eaters know what I'm talking about? The Big Montana was the biggest roast beef sandwich you can get. They don't even make it anymore. It was like, even 10 years ago, this thing was like $15. It was just a giant tub of that purple meat. And I loved it. I love garbage food. I was raised on Carl's Jr. and Coca-Cola. And oh God, I love garbage food. And I wish it were food. I wish it were food. I would keep eating it. And I've had stages of grief around it, and my denial lasted a long time. But knowing this information is power to avoid it. And I know that like maybe there were some stats that, slipped into some of the testimony. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. Like there might be some things you were questioning in the last episode, and that's fine. Like go ahead, do your own research. Reach out to these people who were testifying. A lot of them are on social media and they'll interact with you if you have questions. But I find that information, even if some of it is maybe, like I said, I don't know, but maybe some of it is a little bit more alarmist than it needs to be. I would rather be safe than sorry. And so my hope with these last 2 episodes, it's twofold. Like I was hoping that these episodes might help you dodge some food red flags. I'm hoping with this episode, maybe if you want to, get high, maybe you don't use Kratom, because I didn't know what it was, but apparently my friends do. I just wanted to let you know what Congress is being told are the red flags. And where there are easy swaps, like why not, But you're not going to know to make those swaps if you don't know that there's dangers lurking in these foods. Because no matter what Trump and the billionaires he's empowering do, we have to eat every day, 3 times a day. And so Congress has been given information that's affecting my choices. I'm grateful to have it. So I wanted you to have it too. But I do think we're living in a country that's experiencing corporate lawlessness that is almost certainly going to get much worse in the next 4 years. And it's already bad. There's no accountability in our legal system right now for corporate law breaking, even if it kills millions of us, as our recent much needed societal examination of our healthcare system has exhibited. And so my intention is to share what they're doing, what Congress is being told that they're doing, so that our little community here, at least, I know that I'm just not ever going to be a big podcaster. This just isn't everyone's cup of tea. You don't want to hear all the bad stuff all the time, and I get it. But there is a great little community here, and I can help protect you with the only power that I can give to you, which is knowledge. But I do know you really don't have to keep writing me to convince me that the second Trump administration will be unpleasant. I'm aware, but it hasn't started yet. And so I'm not focusing on it yet. And I don't have to, and neither do you. And so the next episode, in that spirit of next year doesn't start until next year, well, the last episode of 2024 for Congressional Dish is going to be about the aliens. Because this way, if your family wants to talk politics at the holiday table, whatever holiday you might be celebrating, and you'd rather eat razor blades than talk politics with your family and your friends, well, then you will have the power to shift the conversation to aliens and use congressional testimony to make whatever case at that table you want to make. Because I think aliens are an excellent Trump conversation diversion. And so I will have that gift for you as soon as I can, but definitely before Christmas. And so before I wrap up for today, I do want to thank, we have 3 new executive producers, and one of them has a lot of new executive producer credits. And I'm really excited about this. So first, I'd like to thank Michael Constantino. He is now going to be an executive producer on this episode. He trusts me so much that he decided to put his credit on this episode. So thank you very much for that. And then also, I would like to thank Katie Wallace, who is now an executive producer on 4 episodes of Congressional Dish. And I am so happy to share this byline with you. You're such a big supporter of Congressional Dish. So the 4 episodes that she picked and wants to have move right up the most valuable episodes list is number 201, WTF is the Federal Reserve, which really helps with that episode. That one was number 1 for a while and moved back down. So that's going to be a nice jump for that episode. We also have we have Katie now as an executive producer on 239, The Enablers of Larry Nassar. Her name will also be on 257, The PACT Act, Healthcare for Poison Veterans. That is such an important episode, especially if you are a veteran. Make sure you know what the PACT Act did for you. It greatly expands your access to healthcare, especially if you served in any of the wars of the Bush administration. And then also she put her name on Congressional Dish 296, the Boeing hearings. And she sent in a message along with these executive producer credits. She said, "Hi, Congressional Dish team. I've been an avid listener since December 2020, thanks to a recommendation from one of my closest friends. Shout out Lindsay Powell." Thanks, Lindsay Powell. "Someone I admire and respect deeply. Through listening to your show, I found out about several impactful books: The Creature from Jekyll Island, The Shock Doctrine, and Confessions of an Economic Hitman. The knowledge I've gained from these resources has been invaluable." Oh, girl, don't I know. "I often tell others that Congressional Dish is like nutrition for the brain in a world full of junk food for our ears and minds. Your podcast truly stands out as a rare and meaningful source of information. I'm pretty sure I have 4 executive producer credits to spend. Choosing 4 most valuable episodes was very difficult, but here they are. If I have more than 4, let me know." And then she lists the 4 and says, "Wishing you peace and health for the holidays, Katie Wallace." And Katie, I am wishing you the same. Thank you so much for supporting the show at this level for so long. I am very happy to have your name on those episodes, and all of them will move up the most valued episodes list, which is very cool because those are some of my favorites as well. And finally, Hank Barta has another executive producer credit. This one is going to be for episode 305, Freaky Food. And Hank, I just want to let you know that seeing your executive producer credit be put on that episode was very helpful for me. Because like I said, there was some weird backlash to it that I really wasn't expecting. So to know that you wanted to put your name on it, I know I at least served some of you well. So here's Hank's message, though. He said, "Hi, Jen. I hope the pending holidays are finding you and yours well. I just listened to Jen's most recent podcast, and it really resonated with me. We were careful with diet for our first son, who's now in his mid-40s, and tried to keep him well-nourished. Years later, we learned that his grandfather used to take him to Dunkin' Donuts to get a donut and hot cocoa." That's funny because I am the daughter of Bostonians, and Dunkin's was also a place that we would go when I was at my grandparents' house. Back to his note, though. He said, he told our son that this is our little secret. Ooh, he grew up chubby and still struggles with weight and suffers from a fatty liver. I suppose I have to share the blame because I was more cerebral than athletic as a parent, but I suspect early diet may have been a factor. I think this is an incredibly important subject for U.S. citizens, and I'm sharing the podcast on all of my socials. Please apply one of my producer credits to episode 305. Thanks again for all your work. It's important. Best, Hank. I'm sorry to hear that your son struggles, because God knows, I know what that feels like. I was on Weight Watchers for 13 years. I can tell you that I'm done with Weight Watchers because they keep changing everything. And so I've started using my MyFitnessPal because I'm trying to lose a little bit weight right now. And I'm really liking my MyFitnessPal. I'm finding it easy to use. And so, maybe that's something that can help people who are struggling with your weight. But yeah, it's tough, man. And especially, stuff like donuts. Donuts just, I can take down a whole box. And let me tell you, I have. And I had those habits from when I was very young. And I started on Weight Watchers and paying attention to my food in 2006. So it's now been 18 years. And I'm still looking for tools to help me with it, because I started with MyFitnessPal in mid-October. I have lost 4 pounds since I started using it. So I'm really happy with it. But the fact that it's been 18 years and I feel like I don't have this under control, even though I've changed a lot of the foods that I eat, awareness takes a long time. And yeah, a lot of the stuff that I was eating when I was on Weight Watchers, I was paying only attention to the Weight Watchers points. I was eating a lot of ultra processed food. Like, I remember one of the things that just didn't occur to me at the time as being like kind of messed up, but on the point system, and this was back in when I first started, so maybe like 2007. But when I was on the point system, there were these 3 mini cupcakes. It was like a Hostess thing, 100% ultra processed garbage food. But those were fewer points than a cup of grapes. And so I would eat the cupcakes instead of the grapes. And so I wasn't paying any attention to that. And I knew that like the Weight Watchers meals that I was getting at the grocery store in the freezer aisle, like those were also full of chemicals. Those were also full of salt. And yeah, so even when I was trying to get healthy 18 years ago, I was trying to get healthy in a way that was very unhealthy. And so it's a process, man. Like, it's a process. And so I don't know. I just want to encourage you to be easier on yourself. And my parents they were not athletic either, and that's not their fault. I think I'm the only one that can classify as an athlete in my family. They didn't understand me, but I don't think they did anything wrong. I just think that a lot of this is cultural. I know that a lot of the foods that we eat was because a lot of it was convenience. I remember in the 1980s, that's really when we kind of shifted away from having one parent at home, where money became so much harder to earn that now most of the families I know, both the mom and the dad have to work. And that really started in the 1980s when everything just became more and more and more corporate and more difficult, and our wages stayed low, and all of the badness seemed to accelerate starting in the 1980s. And things have just gotten so much more financially difficult for American families that I think feeding the family convenience had to be prioritized. I don't think blaming ourselves is really the way forward here. You can start over with the next meal. You can do better with whatever you put in your mouth after you finish this episode. You can start right now. And if you don't want to start right now, you can start tomorrow morning. Like, you have that option, and there's really no use in looking back. Now, I don't know if this is true. I haven't looked it up, but I kind of hold on to it. I have heard that over the course of 7 years, all of the cells in our bodies basically regenerate. So you can, if you start now, become a whole new, healthier person over the course of 7 years. And I know I feel differently than I did 7 years ago. And I do think that, obviously quitting drinking helps and focusing on my food, but like, it takes time. And so start now. Like, those donuts that your kid ate 35 years ago, those are not still in his body now. That's not determining who he is now. And so we can forgive our choices of the past and make better ones going forward. And I think the awareness, at least, is going to help us get there. Because one of the cool things, that roundtable that I highlighted for you in the last episode, I think I told you this in the last episode, but it had something like 200,000 views. That is unheard of for the stuff that I watch. Like, even on C-SPAN, when there's a hearing that everyone watches, like, it never gets 200,000 views. This is something that is getting into our culture, this idea that our food supply is not healthy and in some cases maybe not safe. Like, the idea that we don't really know, that's getting out there. And that does give me hope. So yeah, I hope it gets better. And I hope you like these episodes. And for the people who want to get serious about the serious things that are happening, that time is coming. I promise. I know that the National Defense Authorization Act, the text has been released. There are some provisions in it that could tank it in the Senate. So I'm not sure if that text is going to be the final text. This could be a crisis situation that's coming up. But like the Defense Authorization Act will be law by the end of the month because it always gets done. The continuing resolution does look like it's going to be full of dingleberries, so I need to read that in January as well. I have a bunch of hearings that I'm going to be listening to over the holidays. Trump is going to be inaugurated on January 20th, and it's looking like I'm going to physically be there to witness it. So FYI, if you're in DC, we're probably doing a We're Not Wrong live show the night before the inauguration. I'll have more details about that when I have them. But yeah, January is going to get real, and I will get real, and I will get serious, and I will tell you what's in these laws, but we just don't have to do that yet. And so I'm not doing that yet. But yes, I hear you. Trump bad. I get it. All right. I'm going to go research aliens so that I can give you your Christmas gift. So talk to you later. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.